Recently, the DNA lab here at the Health Services Authority received accreditation and became a new weapon in the fight against crime. We sat down with a forensic specialist to find out how the lab will assist the criminal justice system.
Accreditation was always on the forefront of the minds of the major stakeholders of the forensic DNA laboratory. So that is primarily the Attorney General's office and the police, and certainly the HSA, who've overseen the management of the laboratory. Now, there's no legal requirement for a forensic laboratory to be accredited, but there certainly is an expectation in the courts, just because it increases confidence in the practices of the DNA laboratory. The DNA laboratory is going to be offering forensic DNA testing to the police. That is the analysis of crime scene samples and samples that have been obtained from suspects in a particular investigation. Another related stream is the database. In the database will be the DNA profiles we obtain from crime scene samples and suspect samples, but also samples that have been taken from people arrested for offenses. The third stream is paternity testing, which is based on the same technology. The anticipation is that there'll be roughly 1,500 or less samples coming into the laboratory per year for database purposes. I think for forensic testing, we're sort of expecting about 300 or so. For relationship testing, probably about 100 cases per year.
If you're a CSI fan, you've seen how DNA analysis quickly combats crime. Detectives rush the samples to the lab, and by the end of the show, a suspect is behind bars. Well, that's not exactly how it works in real life, but the series has helped some understand the importance of forensics.
CSI, I have to admit I'm not a regular follower of the show, but I've seen some episodes, and I think they have people that have done their homework there, but they do tend to exaggerate how powerful it is, and certainly how fast it's possible on a routine basis to obtain results.
The real-world turnaround time takes much longer and involves several steps.
If you were to just process one sample at a time, which is incredibly inefficient and costly, you could have a turnaround time of 24 hours or next business day. But to be cost-effective, you have to batch them together and process a number of samples together. For routine casework, I'll be attempting to have a turnaround time for routine casework of about 2 weeks. There are 4 sort of general steps to the process. The first is called DNA extraction, and in that step, I basically break open the cells and separate away all of the cellular components away from the DNA. So what I end up with is just a solution of relatively pure DNA. The next step is called quantitation, and in that step I determine how much human DNA I've recovered from the sample. And that's just important because I have to add a particular amount in the next step. And that next step is called Pcr Amplification. It's sort of like a molecular photocopier. What I do is take some of that purified DNA that I obtained earlier, and by treating it with PCR, many copies of the original piece of DNA are made. That's necessary so that I can analyze from a very small amount of starting material. I can actually determine the DNA profile of the person that deposited it. The fourth and final stage is actually the visualization of the DNA profile. You may have seen on TV before the banding pattern that's sometimes referred to as a DNA fingerprint.
The lab is a powerful tool because every person's DNA is unique, with the exception of identical twins. And when evidence from crime scenes is collected and stored properly, it can identify a perpetrator decades later.
DNA profiles can be obtained from bodily fluids such as blood, saliva, and semen, but DNA profiles can also be obtained where you can't identify a body fluid per se, and there's just, for example, just been contact with that item. Sometimes DNA is called the silent witness because it's so sensitive. It can provide really key information in an investigation, and it's generally considered to be both powerful and reliable for court purposes, whereas other forms of forensic testing may be less powerful, and other forms of evidence such as eyewitness testimony and so on can be less reliable. You know, DNA has the strength of being reliable and powerful.
This lab is one of only 2 accredited DNA laboratories within our region. The other is in Puerto Rico.